Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Canon RF 50mm F1.8 STM lens. Commonly known as the Nifty 50, Canon's 50mm f1.8 lenses have obviously been a staple for many photographers over the decades at this point. Primarily because they come at an inexpensive price, and so they allow photographers to try out a prime lens, a fixed focal length lens with a wider maximum aperture, but at a very small price. So it's a small investment, it's a small risk. And over the years, those lenses have been extraordinarily popular for that reason, because they've been optically fairly competent at a very low price point. However, they have also been known as the plastic fantastic because of having a very cheap, some would describe it as throwaway build quality. And I remember when I first laid hands on the 50mm f1.8 Mark II EF lens, it was so plasticky that it felt like a toy. Fortunately, with the RF mount lens, Canon has taken things huge steps forward in terms of the build quality and vastly improved autofocus performance, and even given us a mild improvement in optical performance, as we'll see. Now, if you want more detail on all of that, I recommend that you check out the definitive review, where I take a much deeper dive in build-in features, autofocus, and image quality. Today, we're going to hit the highlights, though, and give you my verdict on the lens itself. So first of all, when we talk about that build, Canon has managed to dramatically improve the overall feel of the lens. I'm filming on it right now on a EOS R5 body, so you get a sense of, how it does and tracking my face during this sequence. But as far as the build goes, this actually feels like a real lens now. It feels like it fits in the family rather than being this whole other class of lens in terms of build quality. And while it's not high grade in terms of build, it's certainly not an L series lens, it does feel like a natural fit with the other consumer grade lenses on the RF mount at this point. And so certainly stylistically, there's a lot more going on here. It's not just a little lump of plastic. It's got some various accent rings on it. I find that the diamond texture pattern of the focus/control ring, more on that in a second, also lends a hint of style to it as well. And so visually, it's vastly improved. The feel in the hand is also vastly improved. Like I said, it feels like a real lens at this point. So as mentioned, there is a dual-purpose ring on it, obviously with a very small lens, and this is a small lens. It's only 40 millimeters in length. It is right over 60 millimeters in diameter. It has a 43mm front filter thread, which is really small, obviously. So the whole lens itself is very small, very compact. Actually, its external dimensions are within a fraction of a millimeter of the EF STM version. So very similar, and they've managed to keep the weight constant at 160 grams. That's particularly impressive in this case because the lens itself, the build, feels so much better. But as noted, it's become standard for all of the RF mount lenses from Canon to have that control ring. In this case, there wasn't room on that tiny short lens barrel, 40 millimeters, for there to be two rings. And so what they've done instead is they've instituted a switch where you can choose between the ring functioning as a focus ring, manual focus ring, or as the standard control ring on RF lenses with whatever function you've assigned to that. I like the idea. I would have liked one thing better if they had changed the actual way that they instituted this, in that even though you can switch it over into focus, you would expect then that you would be able to, kind of go right into manual focus. That's not the case. You still have to select manual focus from within the camera body. So you've lost out on the AF-MF switch. So you don't have a natural way of switching between the two, and so you have to, kind of dive into the menu to get to that setting. It's unfortunate because I think they could have just easily solved that problem, that if you're switched over into the focus aspect, put it right into manual focus. Let it operate like an MF switch there. And of course, then if you want to just have AF operation, switch it over to control, and then you can have whatever functionality you have programmed in for the control ring operation. That's not the way it works, but it feels like that's the way that it should work in operation. The good news, however, is this is by far the best focus ring that we've ever seen. It is smoother. It has a decently good feel to it in terms of damping. Now, if you turn it fast and make a quick focus change, you do feel almost a little bit of drag from the focus motor. It's focused by wire, so you feel just a little bit of resistance from the focus motor and a little bit of noise there. But overall, it works quite well, I think, in my estimation. Whereas some of the manual focus rings on lenses like this in the past have been just jokes. I mean, very scratchy and just terrible. This is not terrible. It's not Zeiss good, not even close, but it's not bad. And so certainly an improvement on that front. Now on the control ring side, this is unique from most Canon RF lenses in that it doesn't have detents. It's not clicked in that sense. And so it may be, for those of you that want to do video with it, you might actually prefer the fact that it has a kind of a declicked, and so you can more smoothly rack through apertures. Although it's still going to be aperture by wire, you know, it's okay. But certainly improvements on all of those fronts. There is no weather sealing here. There's no lens hood that's included. That's standard on all Canon's non-L series lenses, and I do harp on that, and I will just a little bit here, although I'm far less critical on a $200 lens, which is the US price point of this particular lens. The lens hood, unfortunately, is going to set you back an additional $40 if you want that. That's 20% of the total lens price, and so again, it just, you know, for a little chunk of plastic that probably costs Canon in manufacturing a couple of bucks, it feels overpriced, bottom line. And so I think that most people probably opt to do without. Now, obviously, there is no image stabilization in this lens. However, if you're using, as I have been, on one of Canon's new bodies with in-body image stabilization, it is rated to up to 7 stops with Canon's IBIS. And, you know, I didn't try to torture test getting it down to 7 stops. I doubt I'll be able to achieve that. But what I can tell you is that, for example, hand-holding video, it's pretty smooth. And so that, of course, is a great addition. And part of the reason why I'm so glad that Canon embraced in-body image stabilization, because they would never put IS on an inexpensive lens like this. However, you get the benefit of the in-body image stabilization even on a cheap lens like this. So certainly a welcome addition there. Also welcome is the improvement to the STM, or stepping focus motor here. The STM motor, there was an STM motor, I should say, on the EF lens, and while it was improved over previous 50mm f1.8 lenses, it had buzzy micro motors. The focus felt really scratchy. It was smoother and it was quieter, but it wasn't necessarily faster in focus speed. And so in this new version, we've got the smooth and the quiet, but we've also got speed now, which is a welcome change. I really don't have anything negative to report on the autofocus front. I got good accuracy. IAF worked well, whether it was a human subject or a pet. As you can tell from this segment, it's a very stable lens for tracking a face during a talking head segment like this. And so I've used it for a number of, you know, either teaching or video episodes for my channel. And I've had no problems with any kind of pulsing or hunting. So it does a good job on that. Focus is fast. You can go from close to infinity with very little noise in operation. And so a lot of good stuff there. And it just works. And so we'll take a quick look at focus pulls, and so you can see what happens there. So a couple of observations. Obviously, there's only a minimal amount of sound. You can hear just a little bit of that, you know, kind of electronic whirring as it moves back and forth. I did notice on the big focus pull a little bit of a stepping action, a visible stepping action. So it's not a completely smooth, you know, from point A to point B. But again, it's not bad. On the negative front, you may have noticed that there is certainly some focused breathing there, and our timer, Kodak timer in the foreground, its size does change relative to how much in focus it is. So that's about the only negative, though, I can really point to on the stepping motor. It does a great job, and it's notably more sophisticated in operation than what we have seen from previous 50mm f1.8 lenses. The lens is not internally focusing, and so if you focus towards a minimum focus, the inner barrel will extend out about a centimeter in operation. Not a huge amount, but you want to be aware of that. And you probably want to have the setting enabled in your camera that will retract the lens when the camera is powered down. It probably just would be a little bit safer, you know, in case there's a bump that happens along the way there. I also noted in reference to that Canon has improved the minimum focus distance from 35 centimeters down to 30 centimeters, which gives us a high watermark of magnification of 0.25 times, so 1/4 life size. That's certainly welcome, though, as I noted as the trend on the EF version, they also improved magnification there at that point from 0.15 to 0.21 times. So we're making steady, you know, good steps in the right direction. But I noticed that image quality actually takes a little bit of a hit at that very close segment. Some of the aberrations are exaggerated. Contrast is quite low. And so, you know, ironically, you can focus closer, but you get a little bit better results if you don't focus as closely, or at the least you stop it down to give you a little bit better contrast close up. Anyway, I'm glad to see that addition, but neither do I want to, you know, oversell it. This is not going to be a macro lens for you. Now, when it comes to the image quality, this is a similar but new optical formula. You're going to get a little bit of a stutter from me today because it's minus 20 Celsius outside and I am freezing. So pardon any stuttering that happens along the way. But anyway, it has similarly 6 elements in 5 groups, but you can see from this diagram that the spacing of the elements is a little bit different, and the grouping is a little different. You also see there's an addition of a special element. In this case, it's an aspherical element into the optical formula. So, you know, that should help us to have a little better optical performance. And I think in many ways that's true. There's one major regression, however, relative to the EF version. The EF version had less than 2 stops of vignette in the corners. In this case, we have got right over 4 stops. It's an incredibly heavy amount of vignette wide open at f1.8, so much so that I had to max out the correction slider all the way to the right, 100%. To compensate for that in doing a manual correction of the vignette. So certainly in some scenes you will notice that vignette. There's no question about it. Kind of a trend with RF lenses where it seems like for whatever reason there's more vignette on RF lenses relative to EF lenses, you know, where there's a comparable kind of lens design. And so anyway, just a trend that I observed. Good news is that there's basically there is barrel distortion, but it's so minimal that there's basically no need to correct for it. I used a +2, and so it's just a tiny amount that you will barely even notice. In terms of our performance, there's still a bit of uncorrected longitudinal chromatic aberrations, and so a little bit of fringing either before or after the plane of focus. Not bad, however, but there is a bit of it there. The biggest effect of the aberrations that you do have reduced contrast at wide apertures, basically up till around f2.8. The resolution is actually fairly good, even across the frame, but I do find that contrast is not amazing. And so there's a notable difference from f1.8 to f2.8 in terms of your contrast. And from f2.8 on, the lens is actually very, very sharp. It's always been a strength of this particular series. I just think that we've got even a little bit better performance here than what we've seen in times past. The bokeh quality is actually, I think, quite good in a lot of scenarios. And you can see that there's a 7-bladed aperture that does an okay job of keeping a circular shape through f2.8. F4, it's at least round-ish, although you can see the shape of the blades. But of course, in the old 50mm Nifty 50s, you know, it had that 5-bladed aperture that produced a really definite figure when you were stopped down a bit. And so you won't have that problem here, but you will see a bit of the aperture shape. But the bokeh, if the ratio is to where you're fairly close to your subject and then there's some distance to the background, It's quite smooth and creamy, as you can see in these pictures, and I was very happy with that. If the ratio changes to where you're a little bit further from your subject and the background is thus a little closer on the ratio, it tends to get a little busier, as you can see here, and it's in that place where I think that, you know, a portrait photographer, for example, shooting full length, will see a more notable difference with the 50mm f1.2 L series lens. That lens also has much better acuity at wide apertures. It can render fine details, whereas the, you know, the cheaper lens here, it's only okay at that until you get it stopped down. But at the same time, there's you can take some pretty great images with this inexpensive lens. And I think that Canon has improved so many things across the frame that this is a lens that in some ways is a no-brainer for many photographers because of the price. But now I would say it's not just a lens that you consider buying because it's cheap. It's actually a competent lens in basically every metric at this point. No, it's not going to compete with the L series lens, but that lens is 11 times as expensive. And so it's probably going to only appeal to those probably who are professional portrait photographers or those that are willing to drop, for whatever other reason, $2,200 on a 50mm prime. But in this case, an investment of $200 US it feels like a bargain, particularly when RF lenses have been so expensive. And so for that reason, this is a really, really welcome addition to the RF mount, and a lens that was desperately needed. And I'm really glad that it's here and happy to give it a very positive recommendation. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review if you want more information. You can also check out an image gallery if you want to see more photos from it. There's also buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. Beyond that, linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron and help support the channel directly. You can sign up for my newsletter that comes out every Thursday, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button here and make sure to click to get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. And let the light in.